Hi everyone, my name is Lydia Nunnally, and I'm going to be talking about my capstone literature review as well as my project in general and what I plan to do with it so far. So, first, before we get into my literature review, I am just going to review what my idea for my project is going to be. So, I am hoping to do a marketing and event logistics plan for a hypothetical on site brand promotion. I have not planned exactly what I'm going to do when it comes to what type of brand or anything like that yet, but I'm hoping to kind of get an idea of that in the next week, especially now that I have my sources so that I can better make that decision. But I'm going to be taking basically a brand promotion event and planning a hypothetical one that will include a run of show and different kind of activities and things that will be going on during it, as well as a crisis prevention plan and a contingency plan in what will happen if something goes awry, if something goes badly, however that may go. That is basically my plan for my project. So, with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about what sources I decided to utilize for this project. I found this first source to be really, really helpful in giving me perspective of what I'm going to do in event logistics as a whole, but also for this project. It talked a lot about the major gap in event literature and how event logistics mainly is focused in a corporate setting, unfortunately, right now, because this is such a new concept of doing event logistics on the scale of marketing. Um, and it actually did give me a great perspective of talking about. This gave me a great perspective of considering the fast moving nature of live events and how it really requires a specialized approach compared to a standard corporate crisis model. It also provided a lot of useful framework for separating crisis management into pre event, event, and post event stages. I really do plan to use this structure in developing my crisis playbook and identifying the points in which my event team really will need to adjust operations, which leads into my second source, which is talking a little bit more about the comprehensive crisis plan checklist. This specific source is focused on an educational setting in a school safety setting, yet it does a great job of talking about what we should really focus on when it comes to a crisis checklist. Again, in the last one, of course, we're talking about pre-event, event, and post-event stages. This one calls it prevention or planning ahead, intervention, handling it live, and postvention, dealing with the fallout afterwards. These three are pretty much the same as the last source in the same kind of concept, but phrased a little bit differently. And it did give me a good concept of really thinking about the pre-vetting that may happen for my event, whether it's attendees or what kind of activities would be there to best serve the audience, but as well also make sure that we're avoiding any kind of controversial topics within the event, as well as the on-site crisis response and the post-event communication, whether there were a crisis to occur and it was post-event talking about the PR of the event, or even if it's just the cleanup of the event and talking about what we really do after the event is over. That is something that I think we don't always consider, but is just as useful in this situation as the pre-planning. So this source really emphasized the importance of detailed planning rather than relying on general guidelines, which is something I really enjoyed learning about just because it's not talked about in a lot of sources, and it was very useful information to consider as I go about building that crisis plan as well as the run of show in general. So, my third source is talking about the financial risk in governmental events and the logistics modeling. So this source was very useful in understanding the financial side of event logistics when it comes to sponsors, as well as just the overall financial liabilities that come into logistics, such as reserving large blocks of hotel rooms or venue spaces, travel accommodations, whatever it may be. These are all usually booked months in advance, and it's not something that you can exactly cancel last minute. So, when we have this inaccurate demand forecasting or cancellations or unexpected operational disruptions, we can face really devastating financial losses, which is something you may not consider at first when you're talking about crisis. You may just consider the side of the brand's reputation or the PR side of things. So I thought that this source was really essential to understanding the absolute reality of financial risk and putting it into perspective that there is an immediate financial threat that comes along with a crisis at a large scale event. And I really do plan to use Limeric's emphasis on loss prevention to justify why a thorough playbook is necessary, specifically in my contingency framework, which will outline how to minimize sunk costs and prevent or protect vendor deposits if the event lineup or the timeline were needed to be shifted at the last minute. So for my next source, I have one about the feasibility of enhancing the efficiency and sustainability of event logistics in urban areas. This specific source talks a little bit more about the mapping of events as well as actor resource activity. So the authors utilize a dual framework method combining actor resource activity with materials flow mapping. The ARA framework tracks the relationships between the people managing the event or the actors and the physical equipment and venues being used or the resources, as well as the operational tasks being executed or the activities. So this will give me a better understanding of where to put event staff and define their responsibilities, as well as figuring out event resources and operational workflows. And when it comes to material flows mapping, this is more of the visualizing the literal physical movement of the goods, whether it's the signage or the equipment, into and out of the event space. So, with this in mind, this is a lot more into the idea of being very mindful about where things are placed, as well as being very thorough and making sure we know exactly where those things are placed in case of a crisis. So, if something were to happen with a guest, a actor, if you would say, um, and a promotional event were needed to be removed, it is really essential that we know where those materials are and that they are mapped out for us so that we know exactly where to go to either remove it or edit it or adjust it in any way if a crisis were to occur during the event or something was honestly needed to remove due to bottlenecking or any kind of thing like that. Okay. So my next source talks about the logistics management in coastal cities, but as well, it talks about how technology can make live operations more efficient. The digital integration in live events is really useful in helping to handle unexpected operational stress on site. And this is something that I had not considered beforehand, but it is something that I think could be very useful. The source also talked a lot about reverse logistics, or basically the organized process of breaking down, removing, or clearing out event materials and equipment when plans change or the event ends. So, like the last source talked about with event mapping, this could really be useful in understanding the blueprint for how to handle the emergency scrubbing or the compromised materials that may come up at that time. It helps me make sure that my playbook covers the actual physical cleanup and material management during a crisis so that it transitions smoothly and there are no bottlenecks or any kind of congestion that may occur due to us having to clean up a specific area, whether it's because of a controversy or even just a mishap. My next source is a little bit different. It is not technically an academic source, if you would say, but it talks a little bit more about the insightful statistics on why it is important to pre-vet and really be mindful about who is attending an event. Um, it talks a lot about how consumer trust drops instantly when a brand appears to be endorsing, funding, or giving a platform to someone whose values create controversy. So it actually says that 28% of consumers globally report that they will completely stop purchasing from a brand associated with a compromised influencer. The threat spikes significantly with younger audiences. 31% of Gen Z consumers age 18 to 24 will actively cut ties with the brand when associated when an associated creator experiences a public fallout. So this gives us a better idea of why it is so important to have these screenings and these background checks. And they're not just PR safety nets, but they really are a type of loss prevention. It shows the actual statistics of why this may create even more of a financial risk, as we talked about in some of the other sources, especially in Gen Z consumers who are the growing crowd. They are a majority consumer with a lot of brands right now. So, when building an activation playbook, this metric really establishes the baseline cost of crisis, and it allows an event logistics professional to argue that a thorough vetting checklist prevents a predictable 28% drop in brand trust. And it is very essential for us to keep that in mind in the future. And my last source talks a lot about the case study side of things, and specifically with a Shein event. So Shein hosted an all expenses paid exclusive influencer trip to try to shift away from the negative corporate rumors that they were experiencing at the time. However, they invited creators who lacked alignment with the audience's concerns about Shein's ethics, which led to the event really just being labeled as corporate propaganda and receiving little to no clarity on what they were trying to do, if not even creating even more of a negative fallback for them. The lack of proactive vetting really left the invited creators actually facing a massive online hostility as well. And it dragged the brand's public sentiment even lower than it already was. This shows us that when an event team strictly focuses on follower counts rather than values and sentiments, it can create almost a amplified negative effect. And that pre-vetting really is a two-way shield. It proves not only that screening your attendee list protects your brand's reputation, but it also shields your guests from getting dragged into a toxic narrative by association. So this is something that is very essential to us understanding um, how to make a successful event and how to best have the best coverage possible for our event. And all of these things really went into creating more insight for me on the concerns that may be taken into consideration when planning a large scale event, as well as why the crisis prevention plans are essential in these scenarios. And it's really something that has allowed me to have a better framework going into deciding what type of event that I would like to hypothetically host, as well as just overall what my crisis plan should cover to be the most effective in making sure that any kind of crisis that may occur is covered. So that is everything that I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching my video. And yeah, I hope you have a great day.